I also realized that getting bank loans were going to be limited. And I have no problem with somebody starting out getting a bank loan, but you need to get educated fairly quickly on doing creative financing so that you can try that before you offer the bank financing to the seller. So by having those tools in the toolbox, or tool bag at that time, wasn't in the box, I was able to find some owner financing and some private lending that took the place of bank financing on some properties, so I didn't use up all my bank credit. So there were so many opportunities that I was afforded with the creative financing that I couldn't get with going to the bank.
Welcome to the Real Estate and Financial Independence Podcast. My name is Chad Carson. You can also call me Coach, and this is a show all about investing in real estate, achieving financial independence, and doing more of what matters. Hello, everyone. Whether you're a brand new listener or a longtime listener, I always appreciate you being here for another episode. The topic of today's episode is creative financing in real estate since 1980, an interview with Dyches Boddiford, who is a teacher, a friend of mine, a mentor, someone I have learned a lot from over the years, both through his classes and also some of his courses that I've taken. And I had the opportunity to talk with him. I'm actually building a course with him called Creative Financing for Real Estate Investors, that if you're listening to this right when the episode comes out, it'll be out in another week or two, kind of middle of August, but you can see a link to the course in the show or the podcast description. But the conversation with Dyches is about his whole journey as a real estate investor. He started, as the title says, in 1980, buying properties on the side. He had a full-time job, had a career, and he started buying rental properties. And he quickly realized, and interest rates were very high at that time. You're going to learn how he was buying in a climate where interest rates were 18%, but how he learned to build what's called a creative financing toolbox, which basically means trying to figure out other ways to buy real estate and to finance real estate other than just going to the bank and getting a loan. Which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. If you can get a low interest, long-term mortgage at the bank, that's wonderful. But sort of think about that as a hammer. There's one way to build something using a hammer. And if that's the only way you know, you're really limiting your opportunities. You're limiting the value you can offer to other people, both sellers of properties and also other people who can invest with you, if you don't understand this whole toolbox of creative financing. So that's the conversation I'm going to get into in this interview with Dyches, talking about his journey, how he started using private lenders, how he started finding people who would seller finance properties. We talk about tools like a lease with an option to buy. And there's a lot of other tools in the toolbox we didn't have time to get to, but you're going to get kind of a survey of how you use these creative financing tools, why it can be beneficial to you if you've never sort of built your own toolbox of those. And this has been something that's been very critical for my own real estate investing business. It's allowed me to buy and sell and own properties no matter what the market is giving you. And that might be the biggest takeaway from this interview, is that the financing can help you in 2021 when the market's really hot and the interest rates are really low, the market's competitive, or in a downturn when it's really difficult to find the financing, but there's a lot of deals. So in everything in between. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Dyches Boddiford. Before I get started with the topic, I do want to remind you that if you're new here, be sure to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast player or on YouTube so you don't miss anything. I have new episodes that come out every Monday morning. Also, each week I include show notes for the episode with any links that I referenced during the episode. You can find a link to these show notes in the description of the podcast. And finally, if you like the show, we always appreciate your support by leaving a review, particularly on Apple Podcasts. And as a way of saying thank you for those of you who've already left a review, I give away a copy of my book, Retire Early with Real Estate, each week to one person who left a review. Please keep listening all the way to the end of the episode for this week's winner. Now let's get started with today's interview with Dyches Boddiford. Hey Dyches, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Chad. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to this. This has been we've gotten to see each other a lot over the last few months. You've been gracious enough to participate with me and help me put together a course on creative financing. So I want to talk about that some during the call today, but really, I just want to have the opportunity for the podcast audience to get to know you better. And you've been a long time teacher of mine, and I've learned a lot from you. And I just want to give other people the opportunity to learn as well. So thank you again.
I appreciate that.
Well, the first thing I wanted to go into, I always enjoy and appreciate, I've been investing for 18 years, but when I get to talk to people like you, my dad as well, who's also an investor, people who've been in the business for multiple decades, I feel like those of us who haven't have a real advantage to be able to ask questions and learn from the different cycles of the market. And one of the questions I had just to start us off was, I believe did you begin investing in the early 1980s? Is that correct?
1980 itself.
Okay, yes. 1980. So one of the questions I had, a lot of people comments I get today when I'm posting on YouTube or doing different things is that the 2021 market, and sometimes we get so focused in on the way it is today that we forget that there's different cycles and there's different pluses and minuses of every market. And so I'm curious about when you first started in 1980, what were for you as an individual investor who's just getting started, what were some of the unique challenges and maybe some opportunities that were occurring right then in 1980?
Well, for students of economics, they know that 1980-81 was high interest rates. Paul Volcker came in as a head of the Fed and started aggressively moving interest rates up. So when I started investing, I was looking at FHA rates of 18%, and there was other rates out there at up to 25%, very common. Other investors were charging that. So that was the biggest challenge. Now, one thing, that rates and prices of houses kind of vary independently. One goes up, the other goes down. It's not independently. It's
counter-cyclical, or the one go inverse relationship.
Inverse relationship. Yeah. There you go. So we had lower prices on houses at that time. So it scared a lot of people from buying because of the high interest rates, even though the prices were good and there were a lot of houses to be had. Fortunately, I felt like interest rates would be coming down, and I took a dive into the market and bought my first couple of houses in that time frame. One of which was a VA foreclosure, and fortunately, the VA was financing at 9% at that time. And the other was such a low price house that I borrowed the money from another investor at 25% per annum. Now, the fortunate part was the house itself generated, plus my income generated enough money I was able to pay off the house within 18 months. So that was not too bad, but it could have been a lot worse if it had been more expensive.
And just to give some context, at that point, were you working a full-time job and then just buying some rental properties on the side? Was that the kind of strategy?
I was working a full-time job, and had just determined that if I was going to get anywhere, I needed to do some investing on the side. And I didn't really understand stocks. And I had a little bit of experience with houses growing up, since I grew up on a farm, and we did some home repairs, and especially electrical and plumbing. So I had a little bit of an inkling of what it took to keep a property up. So that's why I delved into that area.
Yeah. You mentioned, and it's so interesting to hear just basically the inverse of the market we're in right now, because a lot of people are complaining, man, the prices seem so high, and then the interest rates are so low. Your comment was prices seem pretty good, but interest rates are really high. So for an investor, and we're going back to when you were first starting, what does it mean that prices were pretty good at that point? Was it because the income to price relationship was pretty good? Was it because you could buy a rental and just make it cash flow? Like, what were you looking at when you analyzed the deal at that point?
Well, at that time, of course, the prices were lower. We've had inflation since then, and that's produced a lot of the gains that we've had in any kind of commodity, housing included. But the things that I was looking for was a lower price for the property, the subject property, compared to comparables in the area. I was looking for possibility of owner financing, because I didn't want to use up all my bank credit to start with. And I was looking for a good cash flow. And I'd spent a lot of time calculating cash flows and so forth. I've seen your video on doing cash flows, and well done. It's very, very explicit about what you need to do, because every property needs to be able to stand on its own. And I had learned that early on with one of the first seminars I went to in my education experience. So that was the kind of things I was looking for.
Yeah. And so even, again, just with a 25% interest rate, you bought a property that was cash flowing and you could pay off in 18 months. So
barely cash flowed.
Barely cash flowed. Okay. Got it. So you used some extra money to pay it off.
I did.
Got it. So you started off as a part-time investor. Let's buy some rentals on the side. Did you, at that point, did you have like a big picture idea where you wanted to go with it? Was it just, let's just buy one property and figure it out? Like, I'm just curious what your trajectory was at that point.
Yeah, I would like to say I had it all planned out, had a plan for the 30 years, 40 years I've been doing it. But no, I started out with just, how is this going to work? Am I wanting to stay in this area of investment? Do I want to go somewhere else? Well, I found out in real estate, there's a whole lot of different sub areas that you can get into, such as the lending, buying notes and mortgages, managing property. And so I kept looking at each of these different areas to see where I wanted to be. But starting out, I started out with straight rentals, which I think is the best place for anybody to start out. And I was just kind of making decisions a day at a time. Now, once about 1985 is when I decided to really get serious about it. That's when I drew up my 5-year plan and started working it so that I could get out of working for somebody else.
Could you mind talking about that a little bit more? I think that's
sure,
I think I had a similar experience. I didn't really have a plan up front either. I just kind of got into it, but eventually it was like, well, wait a minute, like maybe I need to figure out how to put all this together and go in a certain direction.
Get serious about it, yeah. Well, I looked at what the cash flows were and what it would take to get enough cash flow to live on. And I made a plan that was a combination of rental properties, flipper properties, and notes, buying notes. At that time, I was making a few loans, but not that many. So it was mainly buying mortgages as a way to generate the cash flow I needed to live day to day. It wasn't a lot. And it certainly works better when you're single than when you get married, because then you have another mouth to feed, and possibly a family that you got to feed and worry about too. So that's kind of how I got started with that. And making a plan is nothing but doing a budget or setting goals. It's all part of a business plan. So that was all part of it.
So you just kind of begin with what are my personal expenses, whatever they might be, maybe add a cushion in there, and then you work it backwards and say, how much cash flow from rentals, how many houses would I have to flip, and how much income from notes would I need to have in order to stack that up and be enough to cover my expenses? Was that basically how it worked?
And it sounds like it might have taken a lot, but it really didn't take that much. I was doing a couple rental houses a year, a flip or two a year, buying a few notes here and there, small dollar notes too. So it wasn't a big effort. It was just a matter of starting and staying with it. Right. And the more education I got, the I found out it was easier and easier.
Yeah. Were there any big obstacles in those first 5 or 6 years that, in particular, I mean, interest rates were probably an obstacle, but can you think of anything else that was a hurdle you had to get over in the early days?
Well, how do you deal with property when you're out of town? Because I was working for a company and I was going to the West Coast a lot. So I was out during the week and then doing a lot of the real estate on the weekends. So I had to learn how to remote manage to an extent and getting other people to help me when there was something I couldn't be there to handle.
Got it. Yeah. Interesting. So you did your rentals, you started flipping houses, learning how to buy that. You kind of had a criteria. I'm curious, what was the market like you were investing in? Like, so I know you were kind of based out of the northern Atlanta area now. Is that where you were investing at that point too?
That is. I've lived in this area since the early 1980s. Just moved a couple of different houses, all within a mile of each other.
Yeah.
So yeah. But I was also investing down in Atlanta, and I learned very quickly that you need to have rentals closer to you. Within a 30-minute drive is ideal, but at least within a 45-minute drive.
Right. And
with Atlanta traffic and all, I found out that I had to start doing things closer to home, and not be all over the place.
Yeah, I grew up in Noonan, Georgia, so what used to be 10 minutes, a 10-minute drive turned into a 50-minute drive just within Coweta County. So I mean, it's right. Atlanta's a whole nother beast in that respect. Yeah.
And also, you didn't know the neighborhoods when you live so far away.
Yeah.
And if you can't keep your finger on the pulse of the neighborhood, you're not going to know when new opportunities present themselves or when the market starts turning on you.
Right.
Because remember, markets are local. We like to think of them as national, but they aren't. They're local, and they're even more local than a big city It's down to the suburbs and to the areas, different areas of the city.
Right. So it sounds like for both you and I, we both invest in our backyards. We like doing that. If people aren't doing that, though, even if they're investing long distance, which has its own challenges, but at least pick a location and try to own that location is what it sounds like. Don't try to be kind of broad all over the place. Try to pick a more focused location, get to know the neighborhoods, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And if you're going to invest out of state, which I don't recommend, but if you're going to do it anyway, get a good real estate management company to handle the rental, and you manage the management company. Right. Learn the laws of the state, know what can and can't be done, and keep your finger on the market itself. You can't expect a management company to manage and keep you up to date on everything that's going on.
Right. Got it. So there's one strategy that people might not be familiar with. I know you the rental properties, the flips, people probably have heard of. You talked about buying notes, and we're gonna get into more of the creative financing toolbox and how we can use it as investors here in a moment. But can you describe a little bit more what that is? Like what does it mean to own a real estate note as opposed to owning a piece of real estate?
A common scenario is a seller carries back some financing, either total financing or partial financing on a property or a piece of land that they sold. And they're collecting money on that over a period of time, usually 5 years, 10 years. Some will actually finance 20 years or even more. And you go in and say, okay, you're getting, say, 5% on this note. I can't afford to have an investment at 5%. I need it at 9% or 11%. So just with a calculator, I can calculate what the return is for this particular payment every month that would generate 9%. So what might have been a $20,000 or $30,000 or $50,000 note to them, I can buy it for 80% or 70% of its current balance, so that it generates a 9% rate for me. So that's buying notes. There are people that buy and sell notes, and that's all they do with real estate. Real estate is just a sideline, a collateral for the notes that they're buying.
For people, there's so many people who are used to this, hey, I go to the bank, I get a mortgage, or I go to a mortgage broker. The fact that there's this parallel almost universe of private mortgages and seller financing mortgages, I mean, is this a big thing or is this a small piece of the pie? I'm just, people are curious maybe how big of an opportunity is that?
Well, there's a significant opportunity out there. Like I said, there are actually small companies that just buy notes and sell notes. But if you can find notes that can be bought, you can make a pretty good return on those. The difference between the banks and the private lenders, the sellers that carry back financing, is that you can get different terms. If you can only afford to pay, say, $500 a month, and the calculations come out that it's going to take $550, you might make an arrangement with the seller to pay him the $500 you can afford to pay and give him a bonus down the road, or pay more down the road to make up for that. The bank's not going to do that with you. Bank has their own little way of doing things, and it needs to be vanilla. Plus, with a bank, you can only get about 5 loans for most banks for their programs. But with seller carryback financing, you get as many as you can find.
Yeah, it's been when I first started, a lot of people know my story on the podcast, but that was the only thing I could do. Like I got a few bank loans, commercial loans, but I was very aware that I'm about to get cut off here if I want to do multiple deals. And so building relationships with private lenders, which I am going to talk a little bit more specifically about in a moment, and then also with sellers, and how do you go out and negotiate that and find that? And to me, it was an eye-opening experience that I assumed as well that, everybody just goes to the bank, or that everybody has a mortgage on their property, when in fact, when you start looking at the amount of properties out there, there's a large number of them are owned free and clear, where they don't have any debt on them, where somebody could create an owner financing note or do something a lot more creative. It was just that, to me, that was just an eye-opening experience that, hey, they're not all these vanilla traditional type transactions. There's a lot of opportunity out there for these more creative type arrangements with sellers, private lenders, with other people.
That's right.
So how long did it take? So you on your second deal, I believe you said you did a private loan. So was it pretty quickly that you started getting into the more non-traditional financing? Was that a necessity? Was that just something you wanted to do at that point?
Well, it was something I wanted to do, but I also realized that getting bank loans were going to be limited. And I have no problem with somebody starting out getting a bank loan, but you need to get educated fairly quickly on doing creative financing so that you can try that before you offer the bank financing to the seller. So by having those tools in the toolbox, or tool bag at that time, wasn't in the box, I was able to find some owner financing and some private lending that took the place of bank financing on some properties, so I didn't use up all my bank credit. Now, later on, I didn't want to go to the banks because of the limitation on terms. They had their strict terms that they would wanted, whereas with a seller, I could get something like low interest rates or get zero interest rates, or I could take over a loan that they were paying somebody else, continue to pay it, and buy the property. So there were so many opportunities that I was afforded with the creative financing that I couldn't get with going to the bank.
Yeah, I think one of the things I learned, and I've from you early on and taking some courses, was this idea of a creative financing toolbox or tool bag, whatever we want to call it. But just this idea that instead of you just having like one hammer and you go out and you make a cash offer or get a bank loan, like there's nothing wrong with a hammer. A hammer works for what it works. But opened my eyes when I started going to your seminar and Pete Fortunato and some of the other John Schaub people and some of the seminars that you've been associated with, was that there are so many more really creative options that benefit the seller, that benefit you, that benefit the private lender if they happen to make a loan to you. It just kind of blew my mind that there's this whole nother universe of deals that you become the person who's almost like the catalyst for a deal. But you have to have the knowledge of these tools, which we're starting to talk about, right, in order to do that. So how did you learn to do that when you first started? Is that something you have to go to a class? Did you observe some other people doing it?
Well, I read a lot and I went to classes. There wasn't a lot to read about at that time about houses, but there were a few books out there, and I consumed all of those. And I talked to a lot of old veterans that have been in the market for a long time. And like you said, people like Pete Fortunato and Jack Miller back then. Jack's passed on now, but they opened my eyes to all the different opportunities I didn't even know existed out there. Some a little more complex, but still it's a way to own more property and control more property.
Well, let's kind of open up that toolbox a little bit, just since we've gotten into it. And I just want to, obviously there's a lot of detail that goes into each one of these, but I want to just, for people who are brand new to this concept, just explain what we mean by some of these creative tools. So we've already kind of touched on a couple of them, but let's talk about the first one that comes to mind for me, at least, is getting a private money lender instead of going to an institution and getting a bank loan. So, right. So maybe the this deal you did at 25% interest. There's different interest rates at this point, but what kind of scenario was that? Was this an individual? Was it a company that did that?
It was another real estate investor that I had met when I first started getting out there looking. By the way, there's a whole lot more to the story. Part of it was the fact that I started looking at property and making offers. And I looked at property and made offers for 6 months before I got my first deal. And then I got 3 deals 3 days in a row. And during this 6 months that I was looking, I met some other investors. I was constantly asking people who does this for their own selves and not for a company. And I found an investor that was really interested in what I was doing, and they had a business and were doing investing at the same time. And so they were talking about, if you ever find something, let me know. Maybe we can partner on it or whatever. Well, I didn't ask to partner because I didn't feel like I knew enough to partner with somebody. I wanted to do it on my own. So I asked for a loan, and they said, well, I can't do less than 25% right now with the market the way it is. So I did my figuring and I said I can make it work. And so I borrowed that. But remember, this was a house that was, I'm pulling this out of the back of my mind. I have to go to my files to see what the exact numbers were. But I was buying this house for about $40,000, and it would be worth probably around 70 or 75,000. And I needed about 32,000 to add to what I had in in order to buy the property. And that's what I borrowed.
Interesting. I'm impressed that you can reach back and remember those numbers. I think it's like I'm a sports fan. My wife is always surprised that I can talk about a play that I had in high school and missed a tackle or did something. And it's like, that's what we do in real estate too. We pull out these deals from, we can remember the numbers. So just to go back to your private lender deal, just in case anybody's confused by that, instead of going to a bank, you needed $32,000. You had about $8,000 on your own, plus probably some fix up money. Instead of going to the bank, it's just basically taking the place of the bank is this individual who wants to get into the real estate game, who wants to do some deals. He wants a higher interest rate, probably. But the advantage for you is that you had 3 deals on the hook, and you might not be able to get the money for this really good deal, and he's willing to loan you the money, and it allows you to knock the deal down and get it done. Was that pretty much how it worked?
That's exactly right. Exactly right.
Right. How does a private lender? Let's kind of go into the psychology of a private lender, because some people might say, well, why would they make the loan to you? So the interest rate, I guess, is one reason. They're getting a higher interest rate. Are there other concerns that a private lender might have?
Yeah, a private lender that's in real estate feels comfortable with it, feels comfortable with the collateral. Once they look at it, they look at your numbers and they say, oh yeah, okay, that looks reasonable. So you will have the money to pay me back. So that's one of the considerations. The other is that they have money sitting that is not earning anything or is earning very low returns. So you might have people that are not in real estate that have CDs, which are returning nothing these days. And they're looking for places to put their money, and they don't want to go into the stock market because of the volatility. And real estate has historically been solid, constant rate of return, and much easier to deal with and feel like it retains its value.
Yeah, you just mentioned several things that whenever I first started talking to private lenders and trying to get over that doubt of why somebody would do it, the first and foremost was that this is an investor who's already comfortable with real estate. Right. It sounds like you met your investor networking, which is where I met my I was always networking at the local real estate investor association, which I'm a big fan of. I know you were a president and member of the Atlanta or Georgia RIA, I guess, at some point. So you meet people who are already interested in real estate. Right. They have some extra capital. Maybe they don't have any time to do it, or not. I don't have enough time. And here you are out finding deals. And so there's a natural relationship there. Somebody who wants to get into real estate, who likes it, who understands the security of it, who likes the income that's coming from it. And the only question is, how do you divide up the profits from this deal? And the simplest way, which you're describing and I've done a lot of too, is just have a borrower-lender relationship, because you can get really complicated with partnerships and syndications and all sorts of things. We're just talking about a real simple scenario here.
Right. And you need to keep it as simple as the deal allows, because, for instance, being partners, unless you have a long-term partner that you know each other really, really well, you never know what their real expectations are, or when they can possibly underperform. Or you might underperform because you had a sick family member you had to take care of, or you yourself were sick. So you're not carrying your weight. But with a lender-debtor relationship, you don't have any of that. It's very clearly delineated who does what. And see, if with that lender that gave me 25% interest rate, if I'd gotten, let's say, a tenant moved out and left the house trash, which could have very easily happened to me back in those days because I didn't know what I was doing, then I could have probably gotten a moratorium on payments for a couple of months while I got everything fixed up and going again. Couldn't get that from the bank.
Right. So for you as a borrower, it's the flexibility, both the availability of the funds, but also the flexibility of a private lender. Right. I know for me in 2008 and 9, we were still newish investors, and we had some reserves, but we were not out of the woods by any means. And just knowing that most of my loans are with private lenders, and I was paying 6% interest in some cases, 8% in other cases. But just knowing that, hey, if things get really bad, we could have a coffee, we could talk about it and say, all right, how can I help you, Mr. and Mrs. Lender? Can I give you additional collateral? Can I help you get more interest later on? Right now I'm in a cash crunch. It never happened, fortunately, but that's a big deal, knowing that in a worst case scenario, a bank is probably just going to pull the rug out from under you and take the property, as opposed to a private lender who you have a better chance of working with.
Right.
Great. So I want to go back to the benefit of it for the private lender. And today in 2021, we're sitting here where interest rates on a CD, for example, I hadn't even looked at them lately, but I'm sure they're 0.5% or 1% or something. If you can offer somebody a safe property to make a loan against. So I'm thinking just some of my examples. I have a $300,000 fourplex, and if I can borrow $200,000 against that property, maybe I bought it for $225,000 or $250,000,
Right.
and I put $25,000 or $50,000 down. This lender has a $200,000 loan against a $300,000 property. I might be able to pay them 4.5%, 6% interest in some cases, depending on the person, and they would still be ahead of the game compared to some of the other alternatives out there.
Exactly. And if for some reason they needed their money back and they needed you to pay it, you could probably find another private lender to take over their loan.
So that scenario, just kind of bringing us back to where we are today. The scenario works. 1980, 1982, 2021, 2020. The basic economics of this and the basic benefits, I would say maybe even more so now today, with the interest rate environment we're in and the competitiveness. This is still a great market to work with private lenders, and so I've found that to be the case.
Right. Yeah, you don't find as many private lenders when the banks are easy with money. It's more out of necessity that some people get private loans, but it should be a target for any of your listeners. Try to get the private loans because they're the ones that are the most flexible, as we were just pointing out.
Right. So I think that's the one big umbrella. We could go into more about private lenders. There's a lot of variations on how you do it, the paperwork, and that's something I feel like your expertise is always really helpful on. It's just the details of that. So there's things to know there. But today I wanted just to give some more of the concepts of how this can work, how it's helpful to people. So let's move from the third-party private lender to another tool in the toolbox. So let's say we're out talking to sellers all the time and we're making offers on properties. A scenario where the seller actually works with us in some form or fashion to help us finance the property. Do you remember did you have an experience when that maybe some of the first times you realized that a seller would finance it to you, or that you could work with somebody like that? Or do you remember any scenarios when that started for you?
Yeah, well, my standard way of approaching a seller was once I went and looked at the property and I got to know them, got to know what they needed the money for, or were they buying another house, or just what their situation was. Then I could offer them an all cash offer, which was usually a low ball. I could offer them a more reasonable offer in their eyes that involved partial or full owner financing. Or I might even have a third combination of those methods. But I never give more than 3 possibilities because it confuses somebody once you get beyond that. But by doing 3, the seller would often forget that one of the answers was no that they could make. And they would say, well, I like this offer and this offer. And it opened that conversation as to how we could come to a meeting of the minds.
So I love the 3 offer strategy. And I forget where I learned that. Might have been from one of your seminars early on, but that's been a very helpful strategy for me as well. Did you find, Dyches, when you were in a negotiation like that, or you're talking to a seller, was seller financing or lease options or any of these more creative kind of ways to work with a seller, were those already on their mind? Was this something the sellers knew about, or was this something you had to approach from a different angle when you explained what it was?
In most cases, the sellers knew of these techniques, but did not know any particulars about the techniques. So at least they were open to listening. And I had to get to the point of being able to explain what the different techniques involved and how it would affect them and how it would affect me. And that's another reason to get to know the sellers well before you make any offer, because you want them to trust you. And when you go in and start saying, basically, as Pete Fortunato says, why would you sell such a nice house like this? And just open the conversation and find out about their family, find out about their financial needs after the house is sold and what they're trying to accomplish, then they're open to listening to some of these ideas. And you can tell when somebody's starting to close down that you've confused them or whatever. And that's a good time to say, well, let's talk to your attorney. Let's talk to your accountant about if this sounds like it might be something you're interested in. Often they won't go to the attorney or the accountant, but they feel like if you offer that you're not trying to take advantage of them, which you shouldn't be.
Right. Yeah, I like that approach as well. And the reason I asked that question, I found, I've done this myself, but also helping other people buy properties with seller financing. Sometimes the technical jargon, which you have to get into at some point, can be confusing just using it too early. And I've just exactly what you've said. I think such great advice is to try to listen more up front, and even from the perspective of what's your role here? Your role is typically listening and helping them try to get whatever their goal is. Like, there's nothing magic about that. Whether it's a private lender, whether it's a seller who's selling their property, whoever it is, we're just trying to help them get from point A to point B. And the tools that we're offering, the 3 offers we're making, if it doesn't get them to point B where they're trying to get, then they're not going to do the deal in the first place. And so the listening, I've just found that to get a seller financing deal done, there's a lot more trust building, listening, getting to know one another that before they'll even consider something like this. And I don't know if you found that to be the case as well.
Right. And sometimes everybody thinks they have to get a deal right there on the spot. And sometimes it just takes the seller being able to sleep on it, being able to talk to their spouse about it more casually. And then you meet back with them. Sometimes that works out better. You got to remember, every person's situation is different. No matter how much it looks like it's like something else you've seen before, there's something different about it. And you won't know what the difference is until you talk to them and get them to voice that difference to you.
Yeah. It's part of the fun part of the business for me too. Just every deal is a little bit different because every person's a little different. Every house is a little different. So it keeps it interesting.
And if you treat the seller nicely so that they come out well on their end, they're going to refer other people to you to sell property. My daughter, who is in this business, kind of surprised me. She bought one house and then was able to buy 2 other houses from the same people because they trusted what she was doing for her.
That says a lot. Yeah. Well, let's talk about that seller in particular. So, why once they get to know you a little bit, maybe they all right, Dyches is a nice person. He seems trustworthy. He's somebody I would want to work with. Why in particular, though, would a seller financing offer? Like, let's say you make those 3 offers and you have the lower offer is all cash. You have maybe another offer that's 80 or 90% of the full price. That's a seller financing offer. What's the benefit in general for a seller to perhaps working with you in that?
Well, obviously they get a higher price, but they also may meet some other issues that they hadn't even thought about until you bring it up. One of which is paying taxes. They may have to pay. Well, they will have to pay all the taxes on all the income they get from the property in a particular year. But if you spread out that money in the form of a mortgage note payments, then they pay taxes over a longer period of time and still pay the same taxes, but they don't have it all coming in one year. They may have a spendthrift spouse that if they got a chunk of money and put it in the bank, it'd be gone on a Cadillac or some other toy. And they may just want to buy and get money coming in on a regular basis so that they can spend as it comes rather than having the big lump sum. I know one lady, that a friend of mine who's an investor, she made a loan to him and would not let him pay in less than 360 payments, which is a 30-year loan. She was 80 years old, and her thought process was when she passed, she didn't want her children to just blow through the money. And if they inherited mortgages, they'd have to take the money in drips, drabs, rather than getting lump sums.
I've had the exact same conversation with a couple of my private lenders as well, where you think intuitively people are like, I want the cash now, but when you're doing estate planning and perhaps your heirs or their spending habits, getting a $500 a month payment would help them pay for their grocery bill or their medical bill, whereas if they got $100,000 in their lap, they're gonna not do something as wise with it.
Yeah, I'm talking about where to find notes and mortgages to buy. Finding one of those heirs with a note and mortgage that they want a lump sum for is a good place to get a good discount.
Yeah, there you go. They want to buy that. They want to buy that Tesla or that Cadillac or whatever it is with that money. Yep. So yeah, I found the same. So that the tax benefits. So we're thinking about somebody might have bought a property for $50,000 and now it's worth $500,000 or $1 million. I mean, there's been a lot of appreciation. If somebody owned the property since the 90s or the 80s, they've experienced a lot of appreciation. So I've run into those situations. And then, but as I've talked to people, I have found what you just mentioned, this income, to be really the deciding factor with a lot of people I bought properties from with seller financing. Was I found a lot of them liked real estate, they liked rental properties. They just didn't anymore like the hassle of kind of having to deal with it and think about it. It was just something in their mind that they just didn't want to have to deal with. And for me, if I could take away the hassle from the real estate, but then let them keep some income and keep the security, they liked all the other stuff about it. They just didn't want to, they wanted to transfer from being a landlord owner to being a person who just receives a note payment every single month from me and let me deal with the hassle. And that idea of just, going up, transforming from being a landlord to being a bank was such an attractive idea for a lot of people. And
that's a common exit tool for a lot of real estate investors. That's their retirement plan, is to sell the houses and have the notes paying them on a regular basis.
And one of the ways I was able to ask that question was like, what, if you can get to the point where you have a trusting conversation with somebody, what do you plan to do with the money if you sell the property? Sounds like you have a nice property. If you sell it for $500,000, would you go buy stocks with it? You're going to buy another property? Because if you can figure out what their plan is to do with the money, or maybe they don't have a plan, maybe they're just going to stick it in the bank, that can tell you a lot about maybe this could be a good candidate for seller financing or not.
Right. For instance, and don't be afraid to ask people what they're going to do with the money. That's a material part of the negotiation. So you need to know what the money is going for. For instance, I can remember a time, and I'm sure this happened more than once, but I can remember a time when a seller told me that they were going to put the money in the bank, wait for another good deal to come along because it was a good market at that time. I said, well, why would you pay all the taxes? Why not use a 1031 exchange? They never heard of a 1031 exchange. So I kind of gave them a rough idea of what it was. And one thing you don't want to do is give legal advice or tax advice. But I said, as I understand it, this is what you can do with a 1031 exchange. And I've done a couple of them. This is what my accountant tells me that they did with the basis, moving it over, and no tax to pay at all if you use all the money in buying the new property. You got 45 days to identify another property and 180 days to close on. So, by pointing out to them what they could do and avoid taxes, I got a real plus in buying the property. Good brownie points.
Yeah. So you ended up buying it for cash, but you helped facilitate that and were able to help them figure out what to do with the money and save money on taxes.
Right. But as you learn more about this, you find out there are other avenues that you could take. For instance, in that particular instance, if it had been a very well-off investor, I could have said, okay, what you can do is you can loan money to me to buy the property, and then I will pay you off within 2 years. So he could have met all the requirements for the 1031 exchange and postponed getting paid off with money he already had.
So you're saying on that same property that he would have sold to you, I'll just make sure I understood that as well. He could make a loan to you.
He could make a loan to me to buy for all cash, and then he would be able to collect on that money from the money I already had sitting that I was going to buy the property with. So I got owner financing. Didn't have to get owner financing, but I got it because I was helping the seller out and getting no taxes on 1031 exchange into another property.
Interesting. Love it. Yeah. So this is just a perfect example. When you've got all your tools on the table, you don't have an agenda when you come into that situation. You're just listening to the seller, trying to figure out what their goals are, what their objectives, what the obstacles are. Right. And if you're a competent person using your tools, then you can at least make some suggestions and by doing that, get a deal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Love it. Such a good example. All right. So one other, we've got a lot of tools we could go into, but one other one that I think is worth bringing up. We've talked about private lending. We've talked about seller financing. Another cousin of seller financing that a lot of people don't consider is the lease option. And this might be a good, with our 3 offer example, maybe you make an all cash offer, maybe a seller financing offer with 5 or 10% down. And maybe though you want to even give them another option where you say, I'll lease the property from you. You still keep owning it, but I'm going to lease it from you for a period of time with an option to buy it. Could you explain a little bit, just what that means? Like that's just kind of a lot of terminology there. What's it mean to lease a house with an option to buy it?
Well, you can lease it so that you are the tenant, though you're not going to live in it. You're going to have the ability as part of the lease to sublease. So then you get a regular tenant in there. You're handling the management. And it's not like you're a management company under the law. Under the law, you are the actual tenant. So you don't have to have a license as a management company or anything like that. And you can just continue making a good little profit from the differential between the rent that you pay this owner and the rent that you get from your subtenant. Now, add an option to that because you tell the owner, I may want to buy this down the road. I don't know right now. And you get an option for 5 years. At the end of 5 years or any time during the 5 years, you can buy the property or you can sell the option to someone else who buys the property. So lease option is kind of a disguised financing because the seller is giving you the right to sell the property to somebody else by having that option.
I've always loved the lease option tool. I haven't used it quite as much as the seller financing or private lending, but the times I have used it, it amazed me because it's a way to make profits on a property, both through the rent that you just described and also through the appreciation of the price without actually owning the property. Like I never took title to that property, and yet I was able to control some of the benefits of the property.
Right. And telling an owner that you just can't afford to buy the property right now, or you're not sure about the neighborhood in the area, you don't know what the quality is, but you'd be glad to manage a tenant in there for a while to see. You can give all kind of reasons why they should give you a lease and an option to buy, and there's no tax ding to them at the time. Taxes will come when they actually sell.
Another big deal. So if we're thinking about the tools in our toolbox, maybe somebody does have a situation where they already have a big tax hit, or they just don't want to take a tax hit for a while. They could give you a lease for a period of time so they can get rid of the management and hassle of the property and your take on that. But then they'd give you an option to buy it for 5 years, but maybe your option starts in year 4. And they know that they can at least not have any tax consequences for the next 4 years. And then starting in year 4 to 5, they might, they could sell, you could buy it from them at that point.
Exactly.
The other thing, I want to see what you think on this one, Dyches. We'll go back to the kind of the current climate of where we are. We always have to adjust to whatever the market's giving us. And one of the difficulties of 2021 is we've had a lot of price appreciation. There's a kind of and this could change overnight, but there's a lower supply of housing and a lot more people looking to buy that properties, both investors and just residents. And so there's this challenge of buying properties at a good price. It's still possible, but it's just more challenging maybe than it would be in a down cycle. And I've always thought if you were to drop me in a high price market where I had to compete and buy properties where the rent to value is not as good, the lease option would be one of my top tools that I would try to use. Because for example, let's say I had a fourplex that I could find, or a duplex that was a $500,000 rental, and it just felt the price seemed a little speculative. Maybe the rent wasn't quite up to where I wanted to be to go borrow a bunch of money against it. But if I could make several lease option offers to different owners to where the rent is enough that I could at least make a margin, where I could have a few $100 between what I'm paying this landlord and what I'm collecting. And then even if I had to get an option at close to what the full price was, because the seller just wasn't going to negotiate much, it would be a way that I could speculate on a location, in a market, on a property, without taking as much risk. Because the worst case scenario, if I put a $5,000 option fee or option premium to get that option, worst case scenario, I'll lose $5,000 and I have to walk away from it. But I'm not risking the whole, having to borrow the money, having to put a huge down payment. I mean, is that an angle for today's market that people might want to consider? I'm just thinking out loud.
You may not have to put down $5,000 in option fee, because if you're doing a lease option, the consideration of you doing a lease and taking over that management responsibility, even though you're going to get paid to do it by the differential, is a benefit to the seller. And therefore, the seller may give you that option for $100 or $1,000, or you may even make an agreement where he gets all the rent for the first 6 months in contemplation of giving you the option as an option fee that's been financed. So there's all kind of ways this can be done.
So it's even better than what I'm describing. Yeah, 5,000 might not be the number. It might be
Yeah.
you can be even better.
And there are people out there that are good managers, and I'm saying that they've gotten educated and they've practiced a lot, got a lot of experience being managers, doing what's known as sandwich leases, and that's just where they lease from the owner with the right to sublease to a tenant, no option involved, and they make quite good money doing that.
So they don't even try to own the property. It's just all about leasing it. And
Right.
with real numbers, maybe you lease it for $1,000 and you sublease it to your tenant for $1,500 and you're making a $500 spread.
Right. That might be a little much on the spread, but that's the concept. A couple $100, $300, that would be very reasonable.
So I just want people to get that the power of all of these tools really, but a lease with an option to buy, not used as often by a lot of investors, but particularly in today's market, hey, if you want to speculate a little bit more, if you're concerned about borrowing a bunch of money on properties or just the prices seem a little out of reach, this is a tool you need to bring to the bear.
And you and I both have used the lease option for selling to mobile homes to tenants or buyers. And it's very common. We're just in a situation where we're landlords instead of sellers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've done it ourselves. So it's not like it's a concept that is we have used it, both of us, as a tool to turn our renters into home buyers. Like when we had a house or a property or a mobile home that our tenant wanted to buy, we used that tool to help them kind of season they could lease it from us for a year or two, have an option to buy it, and then once they got a loan, they could cash us out.
That's right. And almost every tool that we talk about, and when we talk about creative financing, can be either used by the buyer or by the seller, and sometimes even by a third party, like in the case of private lending. So, there's a lot of opportunities.
Love it. Well, I love this topic. The creative financing toolbox has been just an enormous benefit to me and has made me a lot of money and just given me opportunities. A question I want to ask you, because this is something I've learned a lot from you, but one of the key lessons that I really took home and realized the gap in my own knowledge when I first started learning from you was that these concepts are great, but there's a lot of people out there applying them with half the knowledge they need, or just with kind of half-cocked ideas, so to speak. And one of the lessons I took from you is that if you want to get good at anything, you've got to be a craftsperson in your trade. And so with real estate investing, I went to your classes to learn the details of the contracts and the details of what am I getting into here? I need to understand the terminology, the vocabulary, the terms. And so I was hoping you could speak a little bit to that, if maybe you had any experience or seen other people, who on the benefit of really studying and getting good on the details of these tools.
Anything that you get into and you want to be good at, you need to study. And you need to study what other people did right, what they did wrong. The best way to find that is in classes, in educational classes. And every class that you take, your objective should be to go out and make at least what that class cost you in the next 6 months to a year, and hopefully 2 or 3 times what they cost you. The more comfortable you are with a lot of the concepts, the more comfortable you'll be in a negotiation, and the other side will perceive that you're confident and feel more adept to making a good deal with you. So I think education is really, really important. You'll learn one way or the other. You'll learn either in class or out on the street, and learning in class is a whole lot cheaper than learning out on the street.
Yep, no doubt. One response I've heard from people is that, why would you really need to become an expert on a lease or a sublease when you could just go to your local attorney or in other cases a CPA for tax stuff? Like what's the point of knowing all this stuff yourself when you could just hire a team member to do it?
Well, by knowing it yourself, you can make decisions quicker without having to stop and go ask questions. You'll understand why this works and why it doesn't work. And again, it'll make you feel more comfortable in your investing. And you'll know how to put together deals a little bit different way by using the knowledge that you got of different techniques.
And the other thing that I thought about with that is that both of us have attorneys on our team. We have CPAs on our team. But having an intelligent conversation with those team members is really difficult if you haven't versed yourself in the vocabulary and just learned it. You don't even know the questions to ask if you haven't educated yourself.
Well, I'll give you an example. Back in the late 1980s, I had a lot of second mortgages I was dealing with, and it was very common before they changed the bankruptcy rules for someone to get behind in making their payments and then just bankrupt and be able to get rid of a property or that they had. And I had to fight bankruptcy in a lot of cases. So I went to an attorney that did bankruptcy. He did it for lenders. And he taught me, the different areas of the bankruptcy code. And I kept saying, well, if you can do this, why don't we pay for the trustee payment? If they don't make the payment, we'll keep them in bankruptcy so we can finish the foreclosure. Now, that's kind of a complex way of an example, but it was just knowing the different ways that I could deal with the issue as a lender. And the attorney never had asked that question. The attorney just knew what the law was. He knew a standard way of going through the process that it was only involved him. The lender was going to get involved. There was a lot of other opportunities to take care of the problem.
Right. Yeah. So you knowing your role, you're the entrepreneur, you're the investor who can ask good questions, and an attorney at their best, and a good attorney is a technician who's very knowledgeable on a very specific set of circumstances. Yep. And then one of the questions you always ask, Dykes, that I've borrowed and appreciated is anytime I get pushback or somebody, an expert is telling me something like, this is how it is. And you say, well, what law is that? Can you show me the law that tells me that's what it is? Or can you show me the,
whatever. Yeah. And you're right. They're technicians, and you got to remember that. If they were so good in real estate, why aren't they out there doing deals? And I can tell you, most real estate investors make a good bit more than the regular run-of-the-mill attorney does.
The smart attorneys end up getting into real estate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, use their expertise as an entrepreneur. But so I guess appreciate that answer, because my point here is that as an entrepreneur, you've got to know your craft. You got to know the questions to ask. And you use those resources, you use those experts as a resource to help you do the deal. But you're the one driving the ship, and ultimately you're the one who has to put your money in the deal. So
I tell you, my attorney, who's now retired, said something to me one day that I thought was very meaningful, and that was the fact that he says, "I can tell you the law, but when it comes down to it, you have to make the business decision." And he's exactly right.
Yeah, well said. Well, I want to step back for a moment. We talked about some of your early days and kind of the journey you took to build cash flow, and then we got into some of the mechanics of how to buy properties with creative financing and tools. I'm wondering if you just look back, you've had a lot of students come through your classes, you've helped people out, you've been done deals with people. Can you think back of, and maybe particularly with the financing, can you think of any of the big mistakes that particularly those of us who are new in the business should be thinking about? When you look back over decades of a career, what are a couple of just big cautions or mistakes that investors have made that you think people should be looking out for?
Not knowing what they can and can't do, or not taking that into consideration in making a deal. I saw a lady make a second mortgage of $30,000 behind a $700,000 first. And when the borrower defaulted on the first, she wasn't able to deal with the $700,000 note, and therefore she got wiped out in foreclosure. So she lost her whole $30,000. And that's just a case of she could have done just fine if she was behind $40,000 or $30,000 note in front of her, but she didn't consider the fact that she couldn't handle the $700,000 note. So that kind of mistake I feel sorry for people when they lose that kind of money, because that really does set you back. But not learning and not understanding what other people's mistakes were will a lot of times make you repeat their mistakes.
In that particular case, is that a case of getting too big of a deal too early? I mean, instead of kind of the John Shaw building wealth on little deals kind of idea, is that a better advice?
Well, I'll give you an example of what mistake I made. I bought apartment complex, three buildings of I think it was 40 units total, and I was getting to be the big boy now. That was 1985. I did that, and over the next year and a half, it ate my lunch, and I lost over $110,000 in that deal because I got too big too soon. I should have just stuck with my single family houses, and I'd have been just fine.
Yep, I've been there, done that as well. The end of 2007, we were flipping houses, and we had our little single family houses, and it wasn't quite that big, but we bought a multifamily property at a bankruptcy auction, and there's just multiple things going on that I really didn't understand. I didn't understand the bankruptcy auction, how that really worked. I didn't understand the contract. I bid too much. I got into an emotional kind of bidding process, and so this. Anytime you get, stretching your comfort zone is one thing, but jumping in a whole nother zone out of your comfort zone, that's when mistakes are made. And the bigger deals you make, the bigger those mistakes cost you money.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's good advice. So I've been investing for 18 years now. And what we've been talking about today, the financing, to me, there's so many things to learn in real estate investing, but the people I've seen go out of business, and even the example you gave, were related to financing. Were related to understanding the way the structure of money is on real estate. I've seen people who lost their entire real estate business in 2007 and 8 because of bad terms with their financing. Mm-hmm. And I looked at my own business. I wasn't necessarily smarter. That person was smarter than me probably at that point, but I had financing terms that allowed me to kind of ride through the storm. Some of it just luck, just happened to do that. Some of it just going to a class. And so I just encourage people, some of the biggest mistakes I've made and I've heard other people make have been related to their financing and not understanding the terms and beyond just the interest rate, the entire scope of their financing. Right. It's a make or break deal. And I don't know if that's what you've seen as well, just over the years with different investors.
That's true. It's true.
Yeah. So everything we've talked about today, the creative financing, I'll have a link to our creative financing for real estate investors course. Dyches and I taught this together. I'm not sure Dyches knew what he got into when I first asked him to teach this with me. He had a great course he taught over the years on creative financing, and I wanted to give it a new spin and put it online. And he's been many, many calls. We put in hours of preparation to build this course and go over each tool. I think we have 13 modules of different tools and different paperwork, and but I'm proud of the end product. I'm proud of what we're putting together. Good. And that I feel like it's going to be something that people can use as a resource. They can have it to help them build that confidence on whatever tool they choose to use. And it depends on when you're listening to this, whether the course will be available or not. It'll be in mid-August of 2021 when it comes out, but I'll have a link in the description if you're interested in the course and you want to get involved and study those and ask questions with me and Dyches, because we'll be answering questions in the course as well.
That's right.
All right. So final question, Dyches. I always ask this of all the guests on the podcast. We have listeners at different levels of their financial independence journey. Some people just starting, some people all the way, getting ready to retire. But in particular, for those who are early in their journey, they like real estate, they're getting into this. Do you have any final advice for them about, what's ahead of them? Maybe just a tip that would help them on their journey to financial independence?
Well, we talked about education being one of the most important things. I'd say second to education is be persistent. Don't let one little failure or one little problem knock you out of the market. Lick your wounds and go back in there and stick with it. I see a lot of people just giving up the first time they have a problem. They'd rather sit on the couch and watch a football game rather than going out and handle the problem. And you can't do that. You got to remember that you're providing a nice, clean place to live for someone else, for them to pay you a monthly rental. And you need to jump on problems, take care of those problems, and provide a nice, clean place for people to live.
Yeah, good advice. You have your moments when it's not going to be easy. There's a lot of other moments that are just fine, but those of us who've been in the business for a while, we have a few little scars here and there, and you have some trouble zones, but right. Persistence kind of gets you through those, and you learn how to solve them and learn how to build a system around them over time.
Yeah, real estate can be very good to you if you're just persistent in it.
Well, really appreciate your time today, Dyches. It's always been enjoyable to learn more about your story. And can you, just want to give you an opportunity to hand off any place where you'd like people to visit with you and stay in touch with you online.
Well, you can look at my website, assets101.com. And of course, Chad's got a lot of free videos on YouTube that I would strongly suggest to people, whether you're a veteran or you're a beginner. So that's where I would kind of point people to, especially beginners.
Well, I appreciate that. And I have a link to Assets 101 in the show notes, and also, of course, to other resources we've talked about. And I look forward to connecting with you and finishing up the course, Dyches, but appreciate your time today, and we'll talk to you next time.
Great. Thank you, Chad.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. You can find a link to today's show notes in the video description or the podcast description below. And if you're new here, please consider hitting that subscription button in your favorite podcast player or on YouTube so you won't miss anything. I have new episodes that come out for the podcast every Monday morning. This is also the time of the show when I give away a copy of my book, Retire Early with Real Estate, to one person who recently left a review on Apple Podcasts. This week's winner goes by the username Jen Carson. It was left on May 7th, 2021, and it says this: "Great for everyone. I found this podcast about a year ago, and since then have changed my path to be able to invest in real estate. The information is great and easy to understand. I recommend for anyone that wants to get started in real estate or needs help getting to the next level." So thank you so much, Jen. If you will send me an email at podcast@coachcarson.com, I'll be happy to get you a copy of the book, Retire Early with Real Estate. I also want to take this time to thank some people behind the scenes who make each and every podcast episode possible. This includes my podcast editor extraordinaire, Michael Wen, my amazing virtual assistant, Megan Thompson, my wife, Carrie, who helps with all sorts of things behind the scenes, including bookkeeping and listening very patiently to all of my ideas before I bring them to you. So thank you to all of them. And of course, thank you to all of you, the listeners of the show. This show exists because of you, is this for you, and I appreciate you being with me each and every week to listen to another episode. Everything I've shared with you in this episode has been for general education purposes. I've not considered your specific situation or risk. Before buying your own investments, be sure to consult a financial, real estate, and/or legal professional. Until next time, I'm Chad Carson. You can always call me Coach, and I'm your host for the Real Estate and Financial Independence podcast, which is all about helping you invest in real estate, achieve financial independence, and do more of what matters. See you next time.